All right. We are live. Welcome back, everyone. This is episode number 95 of Calibrated Live. We are almost to 100. Very exciting, a long road, but we're almost there. Today, I have a very special guest joining me, Brian Berletic from the New Atlas YouTube channel. If you guys don't know his work, you should definitely go over and check out his YouTube page, his Telegram, everything, all of his work. He posts frequently. And it's in long form like I do, so you get a lot of information. You can find those links in the description of this YouTube video. And remember, guys, that if you want Brian to ask, if you want to ask questions for Brian to answer at the end of the live stream, we will be doing a Q&A like I normally do. So get those questions in through Super Chats, and we will answer those at the end. Without further ado, I would like to bring to the stage the one, the only Brian Berletic. Brian, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. It's good to be back. Haven't been on the show since I think you just said June something before we went live. So we got a lot to catch up on. I mean, a lot of things happened, and now this last year things have been moving faster than ever, I would say, in this conflict. So there's a lot to catch up on.
Yeah, no, we have a ton to talk about. First and foremost, I think we were in the middle of the Kharkov incursion by the Russians at the time of our last conversation. So now, so far since then, we've had incredible Russian progress in the east, and obviously the Kursk incursion by the Ukrainians, which is actually where it's a good place to start today. Your last video on your YouTube channel was about this Kursk incursion. I had talked to you privately multiple times since the beginning of this, and I think we both agree on exactly what it was and how it ended up turning out. But I would really like to hear your opinion on what you thought the initial objectives of the Kursk incursion were. What the current objectives of the Kursk incursion are, and where it might have gone wrong for the Ukrainians, and what maybe they can do to salvage the situation.
Yeah, well, I think primarily it was a PR stunt. I mean, if you look at Scott, I'm getting some kind of feedback from your side.
Are you?
Yeah.
Is it still happening?
Oh, let's just continue. No, I don't hear it now. Thank you. Okay, so I think it was primarily a PR stunt. They were suffering very low morale because frankly, they're losing the war. They're losing the war very badly. And it just gets worse and worse week by week now. And so what they were trying to do was create some sort of PR event that would boost morale, maybe give them some sort of leverage, at least in their own minds, over the Russians, although that didn't seem very plausible at any point of the Kursk incursion. A lot of people said this could be a bargaining chip, but if anyone's been paying attention to anything that Russia's been saying we're doing since 2014 even, not even a single centimeter of Russian territory held by NATO-backed Ukrainian forces would make any sort of negotiation possible. No negotiation of any kind would take place until this territory was taken back. So there was that. There was also a very compelling argument made by many, and now an argument made by the Russian Ministry of Defense itself, that this offensive was pointed at the Kursk nuclear power plant. I mean, if you look on the map, you can see it was kind of pointed directly at the nuclear power plant. So that seemed like something that they were also including as one of their objectives, considering their attacks on the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant and the way they tried to leverage that as for propaganda value, and also as for putting pressure on Russia, and also to simultaneously accuse Russia of endangering all of Europe by holding a nuclear power plant being shelled by the Ukrainians for some reason. That was their fault. So maybe they were trying to look for some dynamics there if they could reach the Kursk nuclear power plant, but they couldn't. And now it's funny because the Western media cannot even get their op-eds out fast enough. By the time they got their op-eds out about the meaning of the Kursk incursion, I would call it, it was already unraveling and falling apart. And this was something that we all predicted. As soon as it happened, we said, how are they going to hold territory inside Russia, if they can't even hold their heavily fortified lines in the Donbass, they can't hold that. There's no way they're going to hold Kursk. The only reason it was successful in the first place was because there were no there were Russian forces there, but not in any significant number. These were not the type of Russian forces that are operating along the line of contact in the Donbas region. They were conscripts, they were border guards. So that's why they picked this area, because there were no Russian troops in the area. Well, now there's Russian troops in the area, so the viability of the entire operation is out the door. There's no way for them to continue this. So now they have what they always end up with. They begin with these PR stunts, and now what it is just another loose end, hemorrhaging manpower, equipment, supplies, ammunition, none of which they have to spare. And so they have this going. They're worried about losing face more than they are about the strategic implications of continuing this incursion. And then the nature of Russia's counteroffensive, which they're taking their time. They're in no rush to do this, because the longer this goes on for Ukraine, the worse it is in terms of attrition for Ukraine. But the nature of the incursion, if you look at it, the Ukrainians were trying to take out these bridges to try to isolate another part of Kursk so that they maybe could occupy it, or at least could protect the western flank of their incursion. But now Russia has compromised that with their counteroffensive. And so it's moving in the wrong direction for Ukraine. And everything along the line of contact is also moving in the wrong direction for Ukraine.
Yeah. And just to your point about, the PR aspects, I think you should not only look at Kursk, but look at other areas where you also see the sort of the PR campaign continuing unsuccessfully. It's just not focused on at all because of the slight initial success of the Kursk incursion. That was the hyper focus for most of the information space. But realistically, we saw a restart of drone strikes on Russian infrastructure facilities and oil facilities, which is we've seen this for over a year at this point. We've seen this for over a year at this point, where the Russians, or where the Ukrainians are attacking these infrastructure facilities, and it doesn't actually cause any damage. It's just these continuous cuts everywhere. And, one cut will heal by the time the next cut is opened, but they still, put up a lot of smoke into the air. You get a lot of pictures. It looks like Ukraine is accomplishing something through these strikes. And, the information space really carries that. So we have those, which I consider also a PR campaign of some sort that really doesn't benefit Ukraine militarily. It doesn't help them on the battlefield at all. It actually probably makes the situation worse because a Russian response ends up coming from that. And then on top of that, we've seen these special forces operations into the Crimea region, which have continuously yielded zero for the Ukrainians, but they have done them over and over and over again. So I'm in full agreement with you that this was likely a PR campaign. But I think more significant than that is if it overly successful, I believe that it would have been more than a PR campaign, and they would have actually gone for that nuclear power plant like you were talking about. As it began to fail, it very quickly turned into that PR campaign that we were talking about. I wanted to move now from the Kursk region down to the east. At the point I think we were last talking, the Russians had just pushed almost to the Vovicha line on the Vovicha River. For those of you who don't know, that is in the Pokrovsk direction. And at that point, we hadn't seen this massive breakthrough by the Russians that had compromised Ukrainian defenses in the region. And at the time, I think me and you both had stated that much like the Kursk incursion, much like the Kharkov incursion by the Russians, the Kursk incursion was going to yield the same negative result for the Ukrainian military, where they're pulling resources from the Pokrovsk region, from the other lines of defense, fortified lines of defense, to go up and do, like we talked about, the PR campaign up in the north. Do you think that Kursk had a significant impact on the ability for the Ukrainians to defend these lines, Or do you think that the situation was at the point where the Ukrainians were saying we're either going to die by 1,000 cuts and live for, or extend this by 3 months if we continue defending, or we can go for this Kursk operation and try to change the calculus? What do you think that was part of it? I'm just curious as to your thinking.
It's hard to tell, but when Russia opened the new front north of Kharkov city, Ukrainians themselves admitted that they did not have enough manpower and equipment to cover both the original line of contact and now deal with this new front. And they admitted that they were having problems holding Chasiv Yar and also stopping the Russian advance into Kharkov. Then they themselves decided to open yet another front because there was talk about a Russian incursion into Sumy, right across from Kursk. And so they said, well, we'll preempt that and we will go into Kursk. The problem is Ukraine would have had, they still would have been at a disadvantage, but not as much of a disadvantage if they just stayed on the defensive in Sumy rather than going on the offensive into Kursk. And we have to remember the 2022 Kharkov and Kherson offensive, the Ukrainian offensives there. They came out from behind their defenses to go on the offensive, and they lost brigades worth of manpower and equipment. Now they're doing the exact same thing into Kursk. They're still going to lose manpower and equipment on the defensive, just not as quickly. The idea that going into Kursk would have somehow changed the dynamics in any way at all of this conflict, I just don't know who would have honestly believed that. But yes, certainly it has admitted, and again, Ukraine themselves are admitting that this Kursk operation has compromised the line of contact. And this has accelerated the Russian advance along the line of contact, something that was already in the process of accelerating. I was just telling you before we started how people complain that I say the same thing all the time. For the last almost 3 years, I've been saying the same thing. It's a war of attrition, and it's going to drag out for a long time, and not much is going to change. There aren't going to be huge developments. It's not a Netflix series. It's not a Hollywood movie. It's not here to entertain you. Russia is methodically grinding down a NATO-backed proxy on their border. That is what they're doing, and they're going to take their time doing it, and they're going to use a tremendous amount of patience. And to people, spectators, I guess you could call some people, watching this unfold, it's going to be a very long, slow, boring process, I guess. But that's what they're doing. They're doing it very methodically. But the whole point of attrition is you're grinding down Ukrainian military capabilities. You're also exhausting the collective West's military industrial output. Their stockpiles and their output cannot keep up with the pace and the scale of this conflict. And so over time, you will notice that Russian advances have been speeding up very slowly, but if you look month to month, you can see it accelerating. And at the same time, Russia's grinding down Ukrainian combat power. They're increasing their own combat power. So when you add all of this up, the vector sum is going to be acceleration along the line of contact. Russia isn't trying to actually break through Ukrainian defenses. They're grinding them down. And as they collapse and fall back, Russia takes that territory. That's what we're watching happen. The Kursk incursion accelerated this even quicker because now Ukraine has even less manpower, equipment, and ammunition along the line of contact to slow down what was already an accelerating and growing military presence on the Russian side. So they went from a big crisis to an even bigger crisis, and it will just get worse day by day, week by week, month by month.
Yeah. Okay. Well, first off, let me just say, you do say the same thing over and over again. And that is totally fine because I do the exact same thing. Any of my viewers who come into my live streams regularly have probably heard the same conversations about topographical maps, about, key lines of defense, where the Russians are going to push, where they're not going to push, what certain things mean. And just for everybody's personal assessments, me and Brian said from the first week of the Kursk incursion, from the early days of August, that this was going to be another 2-week, morale boost situation where everybody's going to be hyped and excited about this success, this initial success. But in the full picture of the battle, of the war, this does not suit Ukrainian needs at all. I was specifically called a Russian asset, a Russian propagandist, tons of times for this, but I was right, and so was Brian. So I just want to reiterate this point that we do say the same things over and over again, and we may say something that when you hear it and you have your own biases, you might think, oh, this is some sort of Russian propaganda. You know, they're not saying that Ukraine is going to win this, that, and the other. But when it comes down to it, we were correct, and Ukraine is now suffering militarily for it. So that's the difference between propaganda and analysis. I did want to talk to you about the idea of the West allowing Ukraine to use these strike systems, ATACMS, Storm Shadow, Scalp, on targets inside of Russia. It's been sort of the hubbubaloo lately in all of the Western media. You know, Zelensky has been talking about it nonstop. You know, destroy the archer, not the arrows sort of idea. I wanted to get your perspective on that. I know that we talked about it last time. This is not a new idea for the Ukrainians. They've been wanting to do this for a long time. We saw that the HIMARS was allowed to be used in the Belgorod and Kursk region. The guided MLRS, which was previously not allowed by the West, and that didn't really change anything on the battlefield. Do these Western missile systems actually change this, the status quo? And does even the fact that we're having these conversations, does this tell you that this is going to come eventually? I'm under the impression that the West basically has no boundaries at this point because of the desperate situation that they're in. But we have had reports from Keir Starmer and Washington that there has been no change, at least for now, on Western weapon strike systems. Do you think that this is because of Putin's recent comments, that this is actually a significant red line for Russia? Take it away.
Yeah, well, I think they are worried about where that red line actually is and what Russia will do. I think there are many ways Russia can retaliate without ever having to directly engage the collective West. And there's no need for Russia to fire missiles into, say, Europe or at the United States, because their militaries are stretched all around the globe. There's so many indirect ways Russia can retaliate that would actually compound the growing problems the U.S., as I would say, politically captured European partners are already facing around the globe. They're waning power around the globe. So there is this prospect that things can go from bad to even worse for the West by escalating. But what else can they do? Just like you said, they're becoming increasingly desperate. This is also part of this wonder weapon cycle that we've watched so many times. The collective West, Zelensky, the op-eds in the Western newspapers talking about M777, HIMARS, Patriot, M1 Abrams, Challengers, Leopards. What was it? The F-16. Yeah, the F-16 was gonna be the game changer for this time. For real. Those other game changers, forget about them.
And just for everybody listening, about 3 months ago, we talked about F-16s, and what did we say was going to happen with those F-16s? They were going to have trouble with logistics, trouble with basing, and trouble with just general survival, and they lost one on the first day they were in service.
And the interesting thing about the F-16 that was lost, they were attributing that to insufficient training. I mean, I don't know what the actual story was, but they were saying that one of the factors could have been insufficient training, which is something that we said. You can't just because the argument you will hear from people staunchly pro-Ukrainian, send everything we have. We have thousands of tanks and APCs and infantry fighting vehicles and all kinds of spare jets. We can just send them all to Ukraine. How's Ukraine integrating all of these weapons and equipment and vehicles? There's no possible way to do it. It's not an episode of G.I. Joe where your army gets wiped out one week and by the next episode everybody's back with new vehicles. It doesn't work like that in real life. Now with the long range missiles, Ukraine already has these weapons. They already have Storm Shadow, Scalp, ATACMS. They've been using them on Crimea. What difference has this made? What I want people to think about more importantly is Russia itself has fired over 8,000 missiles at targets all across Ukraine. there really is nowhere in Ukraine that Russian missiles cannot reach. And yet, even with this huge barrage of missiles, what is left of Ukraine's Air Force is still able to, on occasion, carry out operations. Now, the West is going to send long-range missiles to Ukraine. They're going to carry out attacks deep into Russia, hypothetically. How are they going to stop Russian military aviation, a much larger Air Force spread out across a much greater area? How are they going to stop that with fewer missiles than Russia, when Russia with 8,000 missiles hasn't been able to fully, I mean, they've made an impact on Ukrainian military aviation, but they haven't eliminated it entirely. So do you see the problem that they have? Again, so what is the actual purpose of launching these missiles into Russia? I think it is fishing for another type of PR stunt that can just keep this going for another couple of months until they can think of the next thing to perpetuate this. People have to remember, from the very beginning, before this even started, the US was pretty sure that Ukraine wasn't going to get through this proxy war. I don't want to continuously bring up the Rand Corporation paper extending Russia from 2019, but they said in that paper that if we're going to try to provoke Russia into a war in Ukraine, if that happens, Ukraine's probably going to lose the war. It could end very badly for Ukraine. But what they were hoping the conflict would do was at least contribute toward overextending and eventually collapsing Russia. That is the grand strategy the US is pursuing. So keeping that in mind, they're not necessarily trying to win the conflict. They're just trying to raise the cost for Russia. Launching missiles deeper into Russia will certainly do that. Is it going to be enough to overextend Russia? They're certainly extending Russia, but will it overextend Russia? That is the question. That is something we have to keep an eye on.
Do you believe that they're going to overextend Russia with the direction you've seen that the Russian economy go, international relations that Russia has been trying to maintain throughout the course of this conflict? Do you see, because this is a real possibility, sometimes things look like they can be going really good on the battlefield for one side, and then, your economy crashes. Could the Russians be looking at anything like this? Is the Western plan that followed that 2019 Rand paper, do you think that is coming out the way that they had hoped in any sort of way?
And it's always enough. I can't rule it out because I don't have access to, contrary to popular belief, I'm not actually a Russian agent, and I don't have access to, a nation state intelligence apparatus. So I could never be sure. But I would say at this point, there's equal chance that the collective West overextends itself in this process. It certainly looks like they are. It certainly looks like they're isolating themselves, crippling their own economy in this process. When we look at wars in the past, a military-industrial base is extremely important. The fact that Russia, despite spending far less on defense, has a larger military-industrial capacity than the entire collective West. That says something about how the collective West is doing business. That doesn't speak well to their plans of trying to overextend. Russia is running things in a very practical and efficient manner, while the collective West is not. Russia is working with a large and growing list of nations around the world economically. And something that you point out, and something that I've tried to impress upon my audience, is the fact that people complain about Russia not doing enough, not doing things fast enough, not being extreme enough in the reaction to Western provocations. But Russia is looking at this in a full spectrum way. They're not looking at this as just a conflict in Ukraine that they're trying to win. They also have to take into consideration the rest of the world that they're doing business with, the fact that they want to do business with more and more of the world. They understand that this conflict itself in isolation, winning that is not necessarily the best option. They need to win this overall conflict and confrontation that's taking place between unipolarism and multipolarism. So they have to take all of that into account. People need to remember this when they're making decisions, when they're exercising patience and restraint. It's not just because they're looking at the conflict in Ukraine. They're also taking into consideration this battle between unipolarism and multipolarism.
First off, I wanted to say, so are you telling me that all of your analysis is just based off of logical reasoning and open source information, Brian? Is that what you're telling me? You don't have access to an international database of information?
Well, what's funny is when I'm constantly called a Russian or sometimes even a Chinese agent or both. The thing is, if you look at my work, all of my work cites solely the Western. Yeah, Thai. I'm also a Thai agent. People have seriously accused me of working for the Thai military and the Thai monarchy. But seriously though, if you look at my work, I only solely cite Western sources. I almost exclusively study the Western think tanks. Their policy papers basically lay everything out. There are no secrets. When you're openly pursuing global primacy, if you read U.S. strategy papers published publicly, they say in the papers that they're trying to establish and maintain American primacy over the planet. I mean, when you really think about what that means, they're talking about global empire. You can't keep something like that secret. So you just look through the think tanks, which are funded by the largest special interests in the collective West. That's what they're doing, and that's all I'm doing is reporting what they're saying, and from what they're saying and how it's actually translating out on the ground, on the battlefield, and in international relations.
Yeah, I think that is a point that people often get. I mean, your critics, your haters, they often will get upset with that. And I think the same thing happens to me where, like you said, I specifically will I don't use TASS. I don't use the Russian MOD unless it's something hyper specific and situational. But I never present information that somebody who is a critic of mine can say is fake news, is nonsense. I like to use Deep State Map because it's not the most accurate, obviously, sort of like Live Map that you use, but it is their sourcing. So you can't, it comes from a pro-Ukrainian source. You can't basically say that it's Russian propaganda at that point. I did want to ask, there's this word that I hear used so often, embarrassing. Embarrassment, some variation of that word in regards to all of these actions that Ukraine takes towards Russia, right? The Kursk incursion, the drone strikes, everything is embarrassing to Putin. I hear this as being a key argument in a lot of the reasoning behind some of these unexplainable actions strategically, I would say, by Ukraine. So my question to you is, what impact does embarrassment have on the battlefield, and why is this such a common trope in that information space for achievements of the Ukrainian armed forces?
Well, honestly, I think they focus on it so much because it's really the only thing they're able to achieve. And then by their own research, their own polling, the collective West has conducted polling inside Russia, looking at the effect of these drone strikes on Moscow. And what they found out was that Russian people were just being further galvanized behind the Russian government through these attacks. They see this, and they don't feel embarrassed. If they're angry at Russian President Vladimir Putin, it's because people will accuse him of being too slow and too soft on Ukraine. So they're not going to get the effect I think they're going for, where, oh, we're so embarrassed, we need to end this war. It's so embarrassing how they took our territory in Kursk. The Russian people are going to see, literal Nazis. I mean, the modern day Nazis in Kursk, and they're going to say, we need to get them out of Kursk, and we'll support the government now more than ever. Some people maybe were on the fence. Now more than ever, they support the government in dealing with Ukraine. And what they're doing is encouraging the Russian population to, in turn, encourage the Russian government to finish this completely, no half measures in dealing with Ukraine. Now, maybe that's part of the plan. I don't know. Maybe that's, they want Russia to commit fully, maybe go all the way to the border with Poland. Think about high a cost that would incur for Russia militarily, economically. Again, this is something that I myself wrestle with and try to figure out. Obviously, the plan was to overextend Russia, but we can see in many ways Russia is getting stronger. Between Russia and the collective West, who is behind this proxy war, who is going to come out stronger? That's the real question. That's what I'm trying to look at, and I don't know. I don't have a final answer regarding that. But yes, I was just reading articles about Kursk, preparing for the video that I published yesterday, and that is the central narrative. It was so embarrassing. It was politically embarrassing. Embarrassing does not change the fundamentals of the war and the fact that Ukraine is losing that war. It does not change the fact that Ukraine didn't have enough manpower or equipment to launch that incursion, did not even have enough manpower and equipment to hold the line of contact, and now have even less manpower and equipment, and the front line is crumbling. So you temporarily, people have to remember, it was very temporary. They managed to embarrass Russia, but now they've made their own strategic situation much, much worse, irreversibly worse. So I don't know. I don't know how that adds up in their minds.
I did have a question for you in regards to the way China is now perceiving the situation in Ukraine. Before the Kursk incursion, the Chinese it seemed like they were working really intensely with the Ukrainian government. The Ukrainian foreign minister went to China and was talking with diplomats there, attempting to reach some sort of ceasefire agreement. It seemed like China was attempting to be sort of the negotiator. I think it is a position that China would definitely like to inherit from the United States. It puts them up on a sort of pedestal, I do believe. I don't think the U.S. could ever allow China to be the peace negotiator in that situation. But outside of that, on the back of the Kursk incursion, which at least from the information that I have, seemed like a direct, I don't know, even the word, a direct counterpoint to what they had been promising the Chinese in terms of achieving some sort of peace negotiations. Do you think that the Chinese perspective on this war has changed since then? And do you think that the Chinese perspective on the West is now being shaped heavily by the Ukraine proxy war?
It's never easy to tell for sure, but I'm almost certain that China and Russia are working very closely. But what China wants to do is go through the motions. They know the collective West cannot be reasoned with. They know they can't be negotiated with, but they have to go through the motions anyway, because what they're trying to do is create an alternative to the US-led international order. They want to create an alternative, and they have to go through the motions, even if it is a complete waste of time. They have to do it because they have to say, at least we tried, before they continue going up the escalation ladder, which the West is intent on climbing and bringing everyone with them. So I don't think they ever seriously thought Ukraine was going to negotiate with Russia. I think the Kursk incursion actually just did China's work for them. Now their hands are untied, and they don't have to waste time anymore pretending to negotiate with Ukraine, who I'm almost certain knew they couldn't negotiate with in the first place. People have to remember, China faces almost an identical crisis, also manufactured by the United States. Their island province of Taiwan was politically captured at the end of World War II, has been militarily occupied by the United States. There's still US forces on Taiwan right now, and they are transforming Taiwan into the same sort of belligerent US armed and backed proxy that they have turned Ukraine into. It's much worse though, because Taiwan is recognized as part of China. So they have the exact same situation. They're going to need Russian support dealing with that. And China almost certainly is supporting Russia, but they have to try to appear fair and try to appear to be negotiating in good faith. And maybe they are negotiating in good faith, but again, just like we all know, Ukraine and their Western sponsors have no intention of negotiating in good faith, but they have to try. They have to say they tried at least.
wanting to achieve some sort of peace. Did it cut out?
Yes. Can you repeat
Yeah,
that?
it was. I don't know why it keeps doing that, but it was just trying to maintain this idea that they were working towards some sort of peace, because the openly just pushing for war is a very bad look. And I think it's pretty clear that nothing was ever going to come out of those negotiations, just based off of what Zelensky is now saying again, where his peace formula is the only peace formula with the Russians leaving, and which is just even so much more ridiculous now than it was 6 months ago, before the situation was completely dire on most parts of the front. Is it doing it again?
Yeah, it just
I don't know.
right there at the end.
I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's our connection or my connection, but it's all good. But yeah, I really don't see how it would have worked out. But I do think that the Chinese sort of, you want to talk about embarrassment? I think that the Chinese felt that embarrassment, and it just works against Ukraine again. So that I do think that is something that was going on at the time of the Kursk operation. And then to your point about the West preferring Ukraine to be destroyed, I'm fully on board with that idea too. I think that Ukraine as a rump state now is just a financial burden on all of Europe. I don't think that it's going to benefit the United States to negotiate any sort of peace at this point. And this slow degrading of the Ukrainian state is the only option. So I'm pretty much in full agreement with you there. Is there anything that you would like to talk about with regards to any of your content, Thailand, anything like that?
Well, I maybe we can talk a little bit more about how this fits in with everything going on in the rest of the world. I notice a lot of people in my audience, especially, they're either focused on Ukraine, the Middle East, or maybe Asia Pacific. Very few people seem to understand how this all fits together. I repeatedly talk about U.S. policies stretching all the way back to the end of the Cold War, to establish the U.S. as the sole superpower on Earth, and to achieve and maintain American primacy over the entire planet. That is their stated strategy, written in black and white in policy papers, signed and dated. That is their policy. So when we see the U.S. backing war in Ukraine, we see them backing Israel in the Middle East, we see them backing the administration in Taiwan, the government in the Philippines, in Asia Pacific. Their military is stretched around the globe. It is very obviously in pursuit of this policy of achieving and maintaining primacy over the planet. And more specifically, they have a stated goal of removing all peer and near-peer competitors, which includes Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. Any nation that doesn't subordinate itself to the United States is slated for removal. We've seen this over and over again. Even small countries that are disobedient, they are infiltrated, undermined, and overthrown. We've seen it over and over again. We just watched Bangladesh get the U.S. color revolution treatment. So it's a global process. People need to understand that the conflict in Ukraine is just one part of a much wider U.S. strategy of trying to achieve and maintain primacy over the globe and eliminate what they call peer and near-peer competitors. They do not want any country or any group of countries to have an independent foreign policy. That includes Europe. So people are, mystified by why Europe is driving itself into the ground. It's because it's being politically captured by the United States. The client regimes put into power across Europe are working against Europe's best interests. They're running Europe into the ground. Before the special military operation, Europe was working closely with Russia and increasingly closely with China. And there was great hope that they would eventually move out from under the shadow that the U.S. has cast over Europe since the end of the Cold War, and all throughout the Cold War, actually, since the end of World War II, really.
Yeah.
But they didn't, because, again, it was politically captured, and these were client regimes. These were not governments working in their own people's best interests. They were working in Washington's best interests. And Washington's best interests see a weak Europe subordinated to the United States. And they cannot afford to even have it be a strong block of nations subordinated to the US, because if there's strength there, there's always the possibility of it trying to work its way out from under US subordinations. I see this as wholly unsustainable, unrealistic. I don't think it's going to work. A lot of people, and this is the crazy thing, because while people are saying, oh, I support Trump and Vance because they want to end the conflict in Ukraine, listen more carefully to what Trump and Vance are saying. They are not saying that they're against the war in Ukraine. They're just against the US spending so much time and energy on it. They want Europe to spend more time and energy on it. So they're not talking about ending it, because they want to pivot toward a much larger and more dangerous conflict. And the principles behind it identical, but just with China. So this is not an improvement. This is actually worse. But it's not as if whoever, Kamala Harris, whoever she's running with, I don't even know the names of these people because it doesn't matter. But no matter who wins the election, they're going to continue the conflict in Ukraine. They will only end it so that they can pivot and pay more attention to the conflict they have planned with China. Regardless of who you vote into office, this is what's going to happen. This is extremely dangerous.
Yeah. And this, I mean, you can hear it. It's both candidates too. In the debate, you heard Kamala say that after Ukraine, Poland is next, which is just like the same lunacy, the same nonsense. It's just, it continues. And I always say this, go vote. Your vote is important, whatever. You might change an administration and they might go in a different direction with their foreign policy. It's not probably going to be a good direction. It's just going to be a different direction. But you're never going to be able to vote out the permanent establishment and the permanent state in the United States. And they're the ones who make all the decisions. Big pharma, big oil, the military industrial complex, and all the money that the lobbies can throw into politics. That's who's making the decisions. So you're voting for president is just this sort of illusion of choice. But I'm also a pessimist and a nihilist. So that's how it goes. I did have one question. Oh, I was just more of a statement for me personally. As to your point about the European vassal states, I really didn't understand this until we got into this conflict, and really Nord Stream solidified this for me. Watching an attack on a allies' civilian infrastructure that their economy is wholly dependent on, and then that state not saying a word about it, not even trying to push for investigations, nothing of the sort, speaks volumes to me about what is happening in Europe. And just the direction it's going, and it's they're like sleepwalking into it. They're happily just living under. I think that the U.S. paying for all of their military spending and allowing them to have all of these social programs and allowing Europe to really become this sort of utopia sort of place over the early 90s and the 90s and early 2000s really. Just put most of Europe into this very complacent place where the U.S. can just do anything and they control all the governments. So I do agree with you there, and I do also agree with you on the point that the candidates, Donald Trump is not going to end the war in Ukraine. He's just going to pivot into a different direction and have somebody else take it over. So do not expect the war in Ukraine to end anytime soon, in my personal opinion. Let's go ahead and get into some questions. If you guys have questions, go ahead and throw them up in the chat. I will be looking over there and answering them. Brian, what is your next video that you're working on? I'm curious.
Well, I do a weekly update on the conflict in Ukraine. I'm also following very closely this buildup for war with China. And so the next video coming out on Wednesday, will be about this distant blockade. I've covered this in the past. I've covered, it's kind of complex, but what the U.S. is doing, it's not just trying to start a war with China over Taiwan or over the South China Sea. They have for many, many years, if you zoom out and you look at a map where the where the Chinese are working on their Belt and Road Initiative, they have created armed conflicts everywhere the Belt and Road Initiative goes, either armed conflict or political unrest everywhere it is.
Yeah.
So say here in Thailand, there's a high-speed rail line. The US was backing opposition to oppose it and to essentially cancel it if they could. And they were talking about replacing it with the Hyperloop, which doesn't even exist. So essentially, they were just going to build nothing. They were just going to cancel it and build nothing, but they had to say they were going to build something else just to sound reasonable. In Pakistan, they have armed militants literally killing Chinese engineers and attacking infrastructure there. In Myanmar, Thailand's neighbor to the west, there's a US-backed armed conflict unfolding there, and they are regularly attacking joint infrastructure projects built by China. All of these Belt and Road Initiative projects are creating alternative economic lines of communication for China, because otherwise they do everything by sea. It has to go through the Strait of Hormuz, through the Strait of Malacca, through the South China Sea, where the U.S. is building up its navy to cut Chinese shipping off. And the U.S. military understands that a conflict off of Chinese shores is going to go very poorly for the U.S. So what they're planning on doing is leveraging their advantage, the fact that their military is wrapped around the globe. They could attack Chinese shipping well out of range of Chinese missiles, warplanes, and warships. The funny thing is they've convinced the world that China is some sort of military threat. But in all of their policy papers, they admit the Chinese military is confined to China. It solely exists to defend China and does not have the ability to project military power around the globe. So they were talking about a distant blockade where they can cut Chinese shipping out of range of Chinese military capabilities. But think about this. I want everyone to think about this carefully. Who is the largest trade partner of China, or who counts China as their largest trade partner? Almost every country on earth. So if the United States cuts Chinese shipping, they're cutting global trade for everybody. They will collapse the global economy. And we were talking about how desperate the US has become just in terms of Ukraine and the irrational things they are doing because they are so desperate. Well, their desperation to prevent China from surpassing the collective West is off the charts. It's almost impossible to explain to people how desperate and crazy they have become. A non-white nation surpassing the collective West. This is unacceptable in their mind. They will not accept this, and they will do anything to prevent this. So collapsing the global economy and hoping that, and we see the US doing this right now as we speak, decoupling and managing the risks of working with China. They're doing this so they can collapse the Chinese economy, even the rest of the global economy, and they themselves will have what they're trying to make an independent economy that they can build on top of the ashes. This is how crazy they've become. And so people need to be aware of this and see the big picture. And Ukraine fits into this. And the conflict in the Middle East fits into this. But this is the ultimate objective of the US, is to prevent China's rise. And this global conflict they're engineering, people need to be aware of this. So that will be the video on Wednesday.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, I just recently caught up on your I watched the video about the Kursk when the video about the super weapons in combating China. I like that one. That was a good video. The first question comes to us from Troy in Kansas City. What happens after Russia defeats Ukraine? What does that look like? Will NATO disband? Does the U.S. lose hegemony? So many.
Okay, it's just, you cut out again. I don't know what's going on, but anyway, I mean, what does victory for Russia look like in terms of Ukraine? I think at a minimum, what Russia is going to do is take a significant amount of Ukrainian territory. I'm not sure if they will be able to take all Ukrainian territory. They haven't said that they were going to. They have actually repeatedly said they don't plan on taking all Ukrainian territory. You do have some people in the Russian government, other officials, but not speaking officially for the Russian government, saying they want to go all the way to the border with Poland. But I think what will end up happening is there will be some sort of rump state left, and the U.S. is going to try to incorporate that into both the European Union and NATO. But that's a ways off. A lot of people are talking about Ukraine collapsing like this year, before the elections, or something like that. I think this is going to be dragging out for a very long time because the U.S. is doing everything in its power to drag it out for as long as possible. So we just have to wait and see. Look at the conflict in Syria. The U.S. proxy war in Syria has been going on since 2011. Russia intervened in 2015. Russian forces are still there. It's been a long, tedious, stretched out conflict with still to this day, no end in sight. I think that's what Ukraine is going to end up turning out to be as well.
Yeah, I tend, like, as always, I tend to agree, Brian. Here we go. This question is from Arnie. What do you guys think about the promise from Xi if Washington attacks Russia, he and his military will respond and send help? I don't know. Have you seen anything about this? I haven't seen anything in this regard.
No, well, what could China do? I mean, again, I just explained how China does not have the ability to project military power around the globe. People think that if you have a big military, that automatically translates into having global military power. It doesn't. You actually have to build the Strategic Airlift Command to project power that way, sea lift. You have to have a network of bases overseas. People take for granted the immense amount of infrastructure the U.S. has built over decades that allows it to project military power all around the globe. That's not something any nation can just do. Russia intervening in Syria was only because they already had a military base there. Yep. China doesn't have military bases stretched out all around the globe. I think they have one base that's part of some UN initiative in Djibouti on the Horn of Africa, and that was part of anti-piracy operations. And
the U.S. cannot stand it being there as well. So
yes,
yeah, yes. The one base that China has to project any sort of influence anywhere around the world is hated by the West. So I remember that back when my friend was in the Marines, and he was telling me that they got a safety brief when they got to Djibouti about talking to anybody because they were hyper suspicious of Chinese, espionage in the region. So, yeah, that is very true. There is basically only one military in the world that can project itself, and that is the hegemony, right? Let's see. Any more questions in here? When was the last time they used Storm Shadow weapons to hit targets in Crimea? Not recently, actually. It's been quite a long time since we've seen any Storm Shadow or scalp strikes, and I think that has to do with a lot of the Su-24 airframes being destroyed at bases, as well as, I mean, the problem that we've been talking about for years. The West doesn't have the military industrial capacity to produce these weapons, to send them in any great numbers. All of the missiles that Ukraine receives are pulled down from current U.S., British, French missile stocks. So that's why we say that they can't just give, what do they say? The U.S. has 2,000 ATACMS. Yeah, that is their tactical ballistic missile arsenal. Like, that is what the U.S. has to utilize if they go to war with another country. If they give all of those weapons to Ukraine and Ukraine would go through them in about 20 days, they will not have anything to defend themselves with. So that's not how it works. And Brian made a point about this. Everybody in the West, in the Western information space says, oh, well, why don't we just give Ukraine all of our Abrams, all of this and that? And they show these videos of boneyards in the United States desert that have, you don't have the ability to refurbish these vehicles and send them. The reason why we sent 31 Abrams to Ukraine was because we only had literally that many to send, to spare, because it's not even the body of the Abrams that's the problem. It's the engine that's the bottleneck. So, yeah, we're not coming from left field when we say these things. These missiles are few and far between, and the Ukrainians use them like they're going out of style. So, Brian, if you wanted to.
Yeah. Also, what was the success rate when they were using them? When they first initially got them, they were launching several at a time. You have to remember, it's an air-launched cruise missile, the Storm Shadow and the Scalp. So you have to have warplanes in the sky launching them. You have to launch a number of them because a number of them are going to inevitably be shot down. So you have to launch a large number of them if you want even a small number of them to get through Russian air and missile defenses. And then when they hit their targets, what are they hitting and how effective is that? So there's so many factors here. It's not just sending the missiles and the missiles automatically translating into destroyed Russian infrastructure. There's a whole process that has to take place for this to happen. The same goes for land-based, ground-launched missiles of any kind. These have to come from physical launchers. You have to have a number of the launchers firing them all at the same time to create a barrage, because a number of them are going to be disrupted by electronic warfare and also intercepted. So this is something that people are always factoring out when they're imagining that these wonder weapons are going to make some sort of difference. And you have 1,000, just say you have 1,000 main battle tanks. Why can't we send half of them to Ukraine? Again, people take for granted the military infrastructure the U.S. has around the globe that allows them to do that. But Ukraine does not have the ability to do that. Not even inside their own country, they don't have the ability to do that.
I mean,
So
we had what, 18 months of prep time for these F-16s? Putting aside pilot training, which again is the major bottleneck for any Western airframe, but let alone bringing a Ukrainian-speaking individual into a English-built and designed airframe, expecting them to have competency in that airframe in such a short period of time, and then instantly throwing them into battle in those airframes, whether it's air defense or whatever, just operating them. It really did show how limited the U.S. is in their capabilities to produce anything. I mean, they're not producing the planes, but they could have given more than 6 F-16s. They had the ability to donate more of these aircraft, Europe, the United States. But really, the pilot training and the logistics required to maintain and support this new system on top of all of the old systems that they're currently maintaining is just so much work. It was never going to work, and it was so clear. It's why you have to listen to people who, I mean, it's hard to know at the time, but when people are talking about these things, like it's going to be like cake, it's going to be so easy. Oh, we're just going to get F-16s and it's going to change the course of the war. We're just going to get HIMARS and it's going to change the course of the war. And they act like there's no reactionary force on the other side. It's like the Ukrainians are fighting a war against a ghost, where the Russians don't have any free agency to say, hey, we're not going to allow this to happen. We're going to strike your F-16 at your base in the west of Ukraine, which is what I think happened. I don't believe the story about the friendly fire or the drone collision stuff. I think that the F-16 and the operator were destroyed on base while they were refueling and heading out again, which again just shows that it's not a wonder weapon. It's just like any other burnable vehicle. When it's on the ground, you can hit it and it is destroyed. So yeah, I am in agreement with you there. Here's just sort of a nice one. Thank you, Max. The 2 individuals who do not simp to the West and tell the Ukraine events as they really are refreshing. I appreciate it, brother. That's what we're trying to do. And again, I always say this. They call us Russian assets. They call us Russian propagandists because we don't say the right things from time to time, according to them. But really, all we're trying to do is just inform the English-speaking audience. And if, in my personal perspective on it was when I joined into the information space, I was new and I saw a complete void of information for English-speaking Western audience on the Ukraine conflict. That's why I stepped up and started doing this. And I think Brian has been doing it much longer than me, and he's been much more successful than me at it. So yeah, he knows all about that world. But I really do appreciate that comment. I've followed you since December 2021. I just wanted to say you've been 100% right. Even the Chinese terracotta army can defeat EU. LOL. He killed Germans. And then the last one here, Turkey joining BRICS gives Russia majority presence in the Black Sea. No comments. I'm actually curious about this. I don't think that Turkey will ever fully commit one way or the other. I think that they play a fantastic middleman. But I am interested on your opinion on the recent acquisitions or the recent potential acquisitions to BRICS being Turkey and Azerbaijan.
Turkey is very complicated when it comes to geopolitics. It's a NATO member. I mean, people have to remember it's a NATO member. It's been a NATO member for a very long time. It is deeply integrated with NATO and the collective West. There's a lot of dirty business that Turkey has helped facilitate over the decades, including against China directly. People remember Xinjiang. They had the U.S. was basically running a giant separatist terrorist operation in Xinjiang. It was killing hundreds, if not thousands, of people, and the violence was spreading across China, then across Asia, and then they were recruiting extremists from Xinjiang and sending them to the U.S. proxy war in Syria. And Turkey helped facilitate all of that every step of the way. So I would say it's a good step in the right direction, joining BRICS if they do join BRICS. But I think we're going to have to wait for there's going to be a very long transition period for Turkey to go from what it has been doing for decades to the potential role it could play. Although I would say over even just the last 10 years, they have made a transition. At one point, they were at the center of this proxy war the U.S. was waging against Syria. And that has slowly transformed. This goes back to what we were saying about Russia and patience and restraint. If you were because I had followed the Syrian conflict from 2011 onward, and I remember vividly when Turkey shot down a Russian warplane, and then Turkish-backed militants ambushed the Russian rescue teams. And I remember people screaming for blood. They wanted Russia to bomb Turkey or Ankara or something. And they were so frustrated that Russia wasn't doing anything. And I tried to explain at the time that for Russia, revenge is going to be winning this conflict in Syria. It's not going to be getting emotionally satisfying revenge today. It will be winning the conflict in the long run. And part of winning that conflict is turning Turkey toward their interests. A country is not just the leadership at the time. It is millions and millions of people. It is an economy made up of many different components. Russia understands that. They understand that you don't just lash out and strike a country. A country that is your mortal enemy today could be your closest ally tomorrow. Look at Chechnya. This was a separatist region in Russia. Today, people from Chechnya are some of the hardest fighting military units in the Russian armed forces fighting in Ukraine right now. So that is how Russia looks at things. That is how China looks at things. So when people become impatient with what Russia and China are doing regarding Ukraine or the conflict in the Middle East with Israel or what is happening here in Asia Pacific, think about the long game. Think about the journey that Turkey is on from a staunch NATO ally to now pivoting toward the multipolar world. How that would have been impossible if Russia caved into a desire for immediate revenge all those years ago when their plane was shot down deliberately by Turkey and deliberately to provoke Russia. That was the West's greatest dream, was Russia reacting like that and creating a huge uncrossable divide between Russia and Turkey for years to come. And Russia refused to fall into that trap. So people need to keep that in mind. It's a chess game. It's not a boxing match.
Yeah, it's a long-term chess game too. That, I mean, you can see that the direction since, I mean, probably 2006, 2008 by the West has been to just slowly destabilize Russia, pull it away from China, keep control, basically, is what it appears. And we saw it in, the Middle East, with Syria specifically, We're now seeing it in Ukraine. We will probably see it in the South China Sea and with Taiwan. And it's just going to continue. I don't see any of that coming to an end. But I do think that we are reaching a point where reality is going to start hitting, that this project isn't working the way it's supposed to. And through that, I think we're going to start to enter a very dangerous and desperate period of time. The transitions always seem to be the most dangerous.
Yes.
Independent media at its best. I don't know about that, but I appreciate the support. And then, do Russian submarines play a role in deterrent of any kind for NATO? Definitely, they are part of the Russian nuclear triad. So it is a direct aspect of deterrence, of mutually assured destruction, making them think twice before allowing certain strikes into Russia. Yes, this is exactly why I think this red line is being carefully tiptoed around by the West. They're trying to find a way to get past it. But I do really think that this is a very clear-cut red line for the Russians if the Ukrainians are using these Western weapon systems that require Western operators to provide maybe not exactly targeting information, but Ukraine gets all of its targeting information from Western ISR. So it is the West. The West, I would say, is already overly involved in this conflict, but I do really think that this is the line for the Russians. Do you agree with that, Brian?
Well, yes, but also there's many roles submarines play. So even Russian submarines in the Black Sea, we always hear about how Ukraine has secured the Black Sea. But at any time, Russia feels like they can use their diesel-electric submarines to interdict all shipping going in and out of Ukraine. That is a rung up the escalation ladder that they have reserved for future use. They don't feel the need to do it. It really doesn't. It's not going to make any huge difference. Keeping that leverage does make a difference. So there's always that, and there's always the threat of submarines attacking U.S. warships. A step short of nuclear annihilation, they have these submarines that can track and destroy U.S. ships. So I mean, there's many things submarines can do. So they definitely play a role. Now, the red lines, we've seen Russia say many things, and if they have their red lines, they also have said, if you do this, we're going to react, but then they kind of really don't. But then again, this goes back to our conversation about restraint. Again, it goes back to this conversation about restraint. In the long term, who does the vector sum benefit? I would say Russia, China, the multipolar world. They know the longer this goes on, the stronger their positions become, the worse it gets for the collective West. So why do they want to allow themselves to be provoked and accelerate this process when it would favor the West more now than it would a year or two from now?
We talk about PR and how the West always is seeming to try to fight these PR battles. But really, when you zoom out and you look at the entirety, the geostrategic positions that these countries are in, the U.S. it seems like it's losing the PR campaign. It's losing with its support of Israel. It's losing with its proxy war in Ukraine. It's losing its control over Africa. It's seeming like it's having a much more difficult time pushing policy on places like Venezuela. It really looks like the U.S. is sort of being forced back into its corner of the globe. And just from a purely PR perspective, do you see this as well? It looks like a lot of countries are starting to step back and say, oh, we have options. Like Iran, for example, now it seems like they're fully on board with the Russian relationship because the U.S. has spoiled their sanctions regime. Right? Iran doesn't fear trading, or Russia doesn't fear trading with Iran now, and Iran doesn't fear trading with Russia because they're both sanctioned to oblivion. Same goes for North Korea. Same is now going for China as the U.S. starts to pivot towards sanctioning China for its support of the Russian war in Ukraine. I really just do see the U.S. as, even while focusing on PR specifically, still somehow losing the PR campaign globally. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, yes, I do. And again, if you zoom out and you look at the whole period since the end of the Cold War, when the U.S. emerged from the Cold War, they really were the sole superpower on Earth. China couldn't even come close to comparing. Russia was struggling just to survive. The emergent Russian Federation. That has completely changed. So from that period all the way up until now, if there was there would be one dot that would be the US, and you have these a big dot, and you have these two little tiny dots, Russia and China. But those two dots have grown, and many others across the multipolar world are now growing. The rest of the world's power relative to the US is growing and surpassing the US.
Yeah.
If you look, I don't know if people have seen the time lapse, these maps where they show trade. Who is the largest trade partner of most nations around the globe, and how it transitioned from the U.S. years ago, the 1980s, to now China today, in the 2020s, let's say. So things have changed drastically. And yes, I saw someone in the comment section say PR propaganda does not win wars. I mean, it's a contributing factor, but it on its own cannot win. But this is really the only thing the U.S. still is doing very well. I mean, I would still say it is an effective super weapon. Their ability to manipulate and turn populations against their own best interests is spectacular and dangerous, still extremely dangerous. But I just saw, I don't know who he was, but he was some U.S. official, something Rubin, and he and Antony Blinken were both complaining about how RT has undermined support for Ukraine. And they're complaining about how RT is undermining support for Ukraine after Russia violated international law. And I'm just thinking, who for the last 30 years has been regularly violating international law?
Who is currently violating international law? It's not even like a point of hypocrisy where they're like, we were doing it 5 years ago, but now we're different and changed, and Russia's the bad guy. They are sitting in Syria stealing oil.
Yes,
so
they're still in Syria right now at this moment. Iraq has repeatedly told them to leave, and they refuse to leave. So, I mean, who can the U.S. blame for no one taking the idea of national sovereignty seriously, or being so serious about one nation invading another one? The U.S. has been regularly doing it and is still doing it. The other thing is you might forgive nations for being suspicious about the real reason behind this conflict in Ukraine. Maybe they read the Rand Corporation 2019 Rand Corporation paper extending Russia, where they said, let's start a proxy war with Russia in Ukraine to exhaust Russia. That was the Rand Corporation, funded by the US government, that published that paper, not RT. All RT is doing, and this is for the time being, it's always subject to change, but for the time being, the truth suits Russia. The truth suits China and the multipolar world as it emerges. People always have to remain vigilant and objective. That could always change. But at the moment, the truth suits the multipolar world. And so, yes, RT is Russian state media. It is engaged in propaganda, but it is using the truth to its advantage. Whereas the United States is constantly fighting against the truth. Everywhere it goes, everything it does, it needs to lie. I hear these serving senior U.S. officers in cyber command in the various branches of the U.S. military talking about how they have such a great story. Their story is better than Russia's and China's, and they need to just communicate it to the world. But then you see Reuters reporting on how U.S. military cyber command was spreading lies about Chinese health care supplies during COVID to the Philippines, and how they were trying to scare the Philippine population from using these medical supplies, and it was getting people sick and even killed, and they were doing it just to, they said literally just to drag China through the mud, not because of any actual real health concern. So that's their story. Their story is lying, maliciously hurting people to get what they want, to coerce, lie, deceive people. And they're just upset that, other state-funded media operations are able to tell the truth. The truth is always going to be more compelling. And once you wake up to the truth, it's very hard to go back to sleep to it. So this is their problem, and it's getting worse and worse, I would say.
No, I fully agree. I think that, yeah, I like that the truth suits Russia, and that there is no point for them to be lying. I mean, and like you said, this is subject to change, and there's a specific reason why I don't use RT. There's a specific reason why I don't use TASS. I don't want to rely on state-funded media, but to rely on private media in the West is equally as dumb, because it's just as biased and it's just as filled with falsehoods and lies and language manipulation and everything like that. So it's really about being an honest reader and picking apart every single aspect of what you're reading and looking for inaccuracies and looking for illogical statements and looking for non sequiturs and just all the different things like that. We have another question here. With so much discussion in Western podcast circles of nuclear war and Armageddon scenarios, is this more saber rattling on the part of the Western world, or a forecast for the next play for us all to, quote, enjoy?
Well, I would always take nuclear war seriously, because study history, study how many times the United States has seriously considered the use of nuclear weapons. Well, there's one example. In World War II, they dropped not one, but 2 atomic bombs on Japan after Japan was already beyond defeated. They had no navy. They had literally had no means at all of threatening anyone at that point. They had actually already sought to surrender. The U.S. just didn't like the terms of surrender. So they dropped not one, but 2 atomic bombs on Japan. During the Korean War, they considered using nuclear weapons. During the siege of Khe Sanh in Vietnam, they considered using nuclear weapons. They also had plans to annihilate China with nuclear weapons because again, since the end of World War II, they're like, look at how big this country is. Look how many people there are. If they are allowed to develop, they are going to surpass us, and we will never be able to reverse that once it happens. They actually had considered just carpet bombing China with nuclear weapons
during the Korean War, by the way.
Yeah, yes, this was all around that same period, and China actually began designing the building of cities and industries around this eventuality of the U.S. just carpet bombing them with nuclear weapons. So this is something the U.S. has always considered as an option, more than I think people realize. And I think the only reason that they haven't done it is because of mutually assured annihilation, the fact that Russia and China now have nuclear weapons. It's not because the West is so civilized and able to exercise restraints, because they really have no choice. They will be annihilated as well. They're always looking for ways to get around that. I mean, that is why the United States walked away from all these arms control treaties, because they are looking for advantages and to create a scenario where they could conduct a first strike nuclear attack and come out on top out of it. I mean, that is what their dream scenario would be.
Which is lunacy.
Yeah, it's just completely insane. But again, it's insane for a tiny percentage, a single-digit percentage of the population to seek primacy over the rest of the planet, especially now in this day and age where the balance of power technologically, economically, militarily, the balance of power has shifted so significantly, and yet they still seek primacy over the planet. That is irrational. That is irrational to the point of insanity. And yet they still put out entire policy papers, national strategy papers about how to continue pursuing primacy. So they have lost their minds. They really have.
And there's no self-awareness either. That's the alarming part. Is it's not like they have crazy ideas and they go for them, and then when they stop working, they reassess, reevaluate, change direction for their own sake. Like, and I always say, I always say this: if U.S. foreign policy was at least kicking ass and taking name all over the world, it might not be the most morally justifiable, this, that, and the other. But at least if the American people were winning on the back of these foreign policy, escapades, our adventures, our crusades all over the world, if the U.S. was at least benefiting, there could be an argument that, hey, at least we're maintaining hegemony, we're better for the world, whatever you want to tell yourself. But the situation we have right now is the U.S. is just losing everywhere. We're just losing left and right, and the foreign policy, while not benefiting us from a PR perspective, it's not even benefiting us from a material perspective or an economic perspective or a geostrategic perspective. It's just hurting us, and forcing us back and smaller and weaker. And that's one of the major reasons I talk about it, is because the quality of life that so many of you Americans, if you're listening right now, enjoy is going to disappear very quickly. And you're sitting here letting it happen, basically, by not confronting the issues that are in front of you. And part of those issues are both parties in the United States want the exact same thing. That's the issue. You have a one-party system with the illusion of choice. And as long as that continues, you, the American citizen, are going to continue losing. And that's why I talk about this stuff.
Yes. And and then again, you have to think about the whole supremacist mentality in Washington. And I would say London and Brussels, it is so departed from reality to begin with. So they're starting from such a flawed premise, the idea that the West is inherently superior, and they're building everything on top of that. So if you're already skewed in this direction away from reality, everything you build on that is going to be further and further in that direction away from reality. So that is what they have done, and that's why nothing adds up. You were talking.
You could just take the Ukraine conflict right now. You want to talk about people getting so far away from reality. I just saw this post. I'll put it up on the stream here from Euromaidan Press, which obviously, but it just for the pure cope aspect of this. Frontline report, Russian forces finally sacrificed Pokrovsk offensive to defend Kursk. Ukraine managed to alter battlefield dynamics with its Kursk incursion in just 6 weeks. Russia redeployed forces from crucial Pokrovsk offensive, which, by the way, is a flat-out lie. There's no truth to that at all. The Russians have gone on the offensive in the Kursk region, but they're also continuing to progress in the Pokrovsk region. They have not moved units out of that area, but this is the lies that they have to tell themselves. As Brian said, continuing to remove yourself from reality to make this, it's almost like an ideological issue where, it's like an argument about God, where if you say that God isn't real, or you say that God is real, it can destroy your entire perspective on the world. Your entire worldview is destroyed. And that's sort of the same ideological drive, I think, that a lot of the pro-Ukrainian information space has, where if they start admitting these things are going wrong, the entire facade collapses, because we are so many steps away from reality. If you're just one step, that fall isn't so hard. That hit doesn't, come at such a cost. But when you're multiple steps up, it's a 2-story drop to your death, basically.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, some of these people on X,
yes.
these people that have done that. They're about 1,000 stories up right now. And, again, you just pull one card out, it's all going to collapse.
Yeah.
But this is not something that just happens in the pro-Ukrainian community. I have faced this over my many years of doing analysis. Of course, I wasn't supporting NATO in their military destruction of Libya. I did not want to see Libya lose, but the fact was they were going to lose, and I was reporting on that, and people attacked me for that. I'm just telling you the truth, that Libya did not have the military capabilities of fighting these proxies backed by NATO and also NATO air power. It was the perfect military combination to wipe out the Libyan government and destroy the Libyan nation state. And all I did was report that. And I had people, just like we see now with the pro-Ukrainian crowd, talking about secret armies hiding in the desert, and they're going to spring up and somehow win the war at the very end. And some people weren't even talking to me at a certain point. I've gone through the same thing with this whole conflict in the Middle East, Israel and Gaza. the whole nature of Hamas, if you just follow the money, you can see it's a compromised organization. You could see that they rolled out the red carpet for Israel to flatten Gaza. They have most certainly flattened Gaza now. And I had warned at the time that if Israel paced themselves, they would just flatten Gaza from north to south. That is exactly what they did. So I remember so many people telling other people what they wanted to hear. Oh, Hamas, this is a master stroke. They've set a trap for the IDF. They're going to draw them in and destroy them. Nothing of the sort happens.
The trap was the genocide of Gaza. That was the trap.
Yes.
That was the sacrifice by Hamas, by the way, in my personal opinion. I agree with you. The second they went in, there was no chance of them winning on the battlefield. It was just going to be this slog fest that drug Israel into the mud where, Hamas has been living. They don't have all of the high tech, they don't have the military. They don't have the only way you could possibly change the situation with Hamas and the IDF was by forcing the IDF to come in and basically commit a war crime, a genocide against this city, to then destroy them, like on the political, on the global stage, on the international stage, show what Israel is doing to Gaza, show what the West is supporting. I think it's clear that it worked in some aspects. I think you see that Hezbollah and Iran stood up for Hamas, which they're not particularly close. So that was an interesting aspect of that. And we're continuing to have these talks about Israel potentially going into southern Lebanon and fighting Hezbollah. And that would be the ultimate win for Hamas, right? Dragging the IDF into another conflict when they've been in Gaza for over a year. And just to that point, being in Gaza for over a year, people talk about how Russia is the second best military in Ukraine, and there's all those jokes and stuff like that. But you look at the IDF, who has complete air superiority over a small little city like Gaza. I mean, it's a huge city, but in terms of like they don't have logistics, they don't have they can't escape. It's just basically a prison, and it has taken Israel over a year to still not defeat Hamas militarily in Gaza. So yeah, I tend to agree with you there.
Well, I mean, it was predictable. I had warned that in the past, Israel has rushed in full-scale operations. They only go into parts of Gaza, but I said that they would pace themselves. What they have done, though, is flatten Gaza. They've killed tens of thousands of people, and I don't see how this is a win for Hamas. Honestly, like this is maybe something.
The only reason I say that is because my perspective on it was Hamas was reaching the end of their ability to do anything in Gaza. The situation was getting politically almost to the point where, almost like the situation Ukraine is in, there was no win for Hamas with how Israel was combating them. The only way they could basically do anything was by completely sacrificing not only their organization, but the Gaza itself, which is like the ultimate form of martyrdom. And I'm not saying that Hamas is going to win through that. I just think it's better than the loss that they would have taken in the other if they wouldn't have done anything.
So the way I see it is you have Hamas, you have Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a legitimate resistance organization.
Yes.
They threw Israel out of southern Lebanon. They have kept Israel out of Lebanon. Hamas, on the other hand, has always been compromised. They were literally fighting alongside ISIS and Al-Qaeda, backed by Israel, the U.S., and of course their Arab partners, all of it laundered through their Arab partners at the time. And now dynamics have changed in that respect significantly. We were talking about Turkey. How about Saudi Arabia? But the way I see it, and maybe I'm wrong, but Hamas was, in a way, was reaching the end of their utility, but their utility as a compromised resistance organization. It's complicated because when I say Hamas is compromised, they're like, well, Brian, you said everyone in Hamas is a Israeli puppet. That's not what I'm saying. It is a large organization. They have a political and a military wing. The military wing, more than anything, was compromised. Parts of the political wing were compromised. Parts of the political wing were talking with Iran and Hezbollah. So it's not clear cut. But the main problem was Gaza did not actually have a legitimate resistance organization to fight on their behalf. I believe that this whole Hamas October operation, that was a pretext Israel was looking for, and this is something that they wanted. This is not in Israel's best interest. Israel's a proxy just like Ukraine. The U.S. couldn't care less what happens to Israel. They will fight their enemies in the Middle East to the last Israeli if necessary. They will do that. I know a lot of people in the comment section will disagree with me on that. They think AIPAC is the only lobbying organization on earth. It isn't. So by getting Israel into Gaza, creating a permissive environment across the Middle East where peace is not possible and where everything is on the verge of war. That's exactly where the United States wants things. They don't want Saudi Arabia to complete its pivot away from them. They don't want other nations in the region getting together and peacefully developing the region and isolating Israel. So they've created this huge conflagration where there are options to start multiple wars. And the region has been on the verge of war ever since. And it has only been restrained from Hezbollah and Iran. So a lot of people wonder, why aren't they helping the Palestinians? It is a trap. It's a trap, and that's why they have not taken the bait. It's a lose-lose situation for them. They want to help the Palestinian people. There is no resistance organization they can work with in Gaza to help them.
And I really think that the best thing that Iran, and I'll let you finish, I'm sorry. But just to agree with you, the best thing that Iran has done has played the political game instead of the, aggressive military game with regards to Hamas and Gaza, is saying, well, look how bad this is. Look at what Israel's doing. Look how we're not reacting. We're not being the bad guy. We're just sitting back and trying to solve this diplomatically, and you're blowing up negotiators in Tehran. So I think that does suit Iran very, very effectively. And this is why I also think we haven't seen the retaliation from Iran. What does Iran have to gain from giving a casus belli to Israel to go to war with them, or to the neocons to push for a war with Iran? Why do that when you can keep Netanyahu in a bunker, you can keep the Israeli economy on its toes, and you don't have to extend yourself in any way. You don't have to put yourself out there in any way. And the only thing that people will say is, oh, well, Iran is getting embarrassed.
Exactly. It's crazy because we were just talking about this in regards to Ukraine and Russia, and people get that. But then when you talk about Israel as a proxy of the U.S., they're like, no, it's the other way around. Somehow a country with 1/35 the population and 1/50 the GDP is somehow controlling the entire U.S. It's the other way around. And I honestly had hoped that with Ukraine being obviously a U.S. proxy, but all the praise and worship that say Zelensky gets when he goes into Congress, and people will see this and they will surely then understand every time Netanyahu goes to Congress, they're like, this is exactly the same. These are two U.S. proxies.
Yep.
But they don't get it, and they will never get it.
It's the exact same too. It is the exact same. You have these people that are invited that should not be speaking in front of Congress the way that they do. They get up there, they do their speeches, they basically beg for shit. They literally come by on their knees, do a little speech to get what they need, and then go home. It's what they do every single time. I do think that the AIPAC and the Israeli lobby is more effective than the Ukrainian lobby and Zelensky. And I think that's probably maybe why you get some of that. But and the aspect of Israel being a much more established proxy than Ukraine is, is also the difference there. But yes, I do agree that Israel does not control the United States. There is just United States interests that Israel is upholding. It's our forward operating base in the Middle East, guys.
Yes, and the warship that everyone in Washington is made to give Israel when they come and also Ukraine when they come. That is worship of U.S. hegemony. That is not worship of these proxies. People need to really sort that out in their minds. I saw someone in the comment section ask a question: what does the U.S. get from Israel? They have a disposable proxy in the Middle East that is willing to fight all of their enemies indefinitely, regardless of the cost to their own people, population, and prosperity. That's what they get out of it. They can
send warships there. They can send troops there. It is literally like it's just one big forward operating base for the United States in the Middle East. It gives them air bases to utilize. It gives them ports to utilize. And they have no political contention with these countries. So it's not like you're making a deal with Saudi Arabia. It's not like you're making a deal with Lebanon or Cyprus or any of these other places. You control Israel. Israel likes to be controlled by you because they get protection and everything. And they can just do whatever they want. And the U.S. complains about other people and not Israel.
And think about this too. When the Middle East starts coming together and building themselves up, Israel is basically the cartoon TNT plunger. You just push it down and blow everything up. And now you have a giant mess again that the U.S. can, and that's all U.S. policy papers write about for years and years. People need to read these policy papers. Using Israel as a proxy, giving the U.S. plausible deniability. The U.S. can pretend to pursue peace. Oh, we want peace. We want Israel to restrain themselves. By the way, here's some more bombs. And we want peace in the Middle East. Meanwhile, they're doing everything in their power to undermine the peace, which is exactly what they're doing in Ukraine, which is exactly what they're doing in Asia Pacific. I just want people who are overly focused on Israel to zoom out and look at what the U.S. is doing in Ukraine and what the U.S. is doing in Asia Pacific, and ask yourself, I mean, if Israel is controlling the U.S., is it just a coincidence that the exact same type of proxy war is taking place in Europe and also Asia Pacific? It just, it doesn't otherwise make any sense. But the one thing I wanted to say was you were talking, you made a lot of good points about why Iran hasn't retaliated. I don't think it's a surprise at all. I don't really get into this issue much because people are so brainwashed and set in their ways. This is just one of these issues that's been going on for so long. People are so emotionally invested. There really is no way to talk sense into most people, I would say, on both sides. But I wasn't surprised at all that Iran didn't retaliate. Part of retaliating is to create a sense of deterrence, but you cannot deter a proxy who has no interest in self-preservation, just like Russia cannot deter Ukraine because the decisions made in Ukraine are actually being made by and for Washington. Russia has to find a way to deter Washington. Iran has to find a way to deter Washington. So attacking Israel, who has nuclear weapons, and think about this too, there's this closing window of opportunity for the US to use and fully exploit these proxies. And Israel most of all, because it is a long established proxy that they have built up over decades that does have nuclear weapons. They're dying for a way to use those nuclear weapons to one last time before they're not able to anymore. The region is changing so rapidly. And eventually, and I know people don't believe this, but eventually a circle of interest will come into power in Israel and they will pivot toward the multipolar world, just like Turkey has. Imagine 10, 20 years ago, you told me that Turkey would begin looking for entry into BRICS. I wouldn't have believed you. The same thing will eventually happen with Israel. So they're trying to find a way to use Israel to the last Israeli, get all of those weapons used, possibly even use those nuclear weapons before there's no opportunity to do it again. Everyone in the region knows that. Iran knows that. They don't want to get nuked. So they're going to bide their time. Time is working in their favor. Time is working in Hezbollah's favor. It's unfortunate that they have to stand by while Gaza is flattened. But think about the bigger picture and how many more people will end up dead and how many more cities will end up flattened if they fall into this trap. So again, it's a chess game. A lot of people see it as checkers or even more basic than that.
Yeah, and that is an aspect that I think that that was a really good little spiel you just put together there. I was agreeing with that entire thing. We had one more question. Let's see. Will Russia take Odessa? Your guess is as good as ours, man. Who knows? I've always said that if the Russians end up taking Odessa, it's not going to be some naval landing. It's not going to be some big fight. I think that if you look at the map, by the time the Russians would even reach Odessa, the Ukrainian army wouldn't be in existence anymore. There would be no fighting. There would be, I mean, besides some small little pocket of resistance or something, maybe, I don't know. But no, I don't know. It just depends on how far the Russians are basically forced to go at this point. I don't think that the Russians want to go any further than the 4 Oblast that they basically have to take at this point. But I also don't think the West is going to allow them to stop. Because that defeats the whole purpose of the Ukraine project. So you agree with that, Brian?
Yeah, it would be very difficult to take Odessa as things are going right now. But just like you say, I mean, taking the Kherson city, for example, taking that back, I think that would be something that might happen politically rather than militarily. But it'll happen politically because of things that have happened militarily. Yeah. So we'll just have to wait and see. I mean, if President Vladimir Putin could push a button and return Odessa to Russia, he would. But yeah. It's not that easy.
It is not that easy. And there is also the chance of a reaction to the Russians crossing the river and continuing to push. You got to remember that it's not just the Russians fighting a ghost enemy. You can't do the same thing that the pro-Ukrainian community does, where they will pretend like Ukraine can just do whatever they want, and there's no reaction. There's no wall standing in their way to complete said action. So we got to remember that if the Russians decide, hey, we want to get all of Ukraine, there could be a serious response. There could be serious consequences to that action, including but not limited to the Putin regime coming to an end because it overextends itself in some way. The Russian economy not being able to support such a endeavor. There's a million different things that can happen. Something can happen across the river that destroys your geostrategic position with your allies, that destroys your international relations that you've worked so hard to maintain while you're battling the United States and the hegemony. So that's there's a lot that goes into all of the prospects of the Russians achieving a major victory in Ukraine like that. John Mearsheimer is mycologist better on Israel. Wait,
is that a typo or something?
Yeah, I don't know. Mycologist better on Israel. I'm not sure what your question is, but I appreciate the support. That takes us to an hour and 42 minutes. Brian, thank you so much. You've already explained what you got going on, so we're not going to go over that again. Make sure you guys go check out Brian's videos. You can find the link to Brian's YouTube page and his Telegram in the description of this YouTube video. Be sure to go check him out, subscribe to his page, give him likes. He is a great resource. And be sure to go visit his Patreon as well. He, like me, works off of the support of his community. We really appreciate all of you being here today. And yeah, any final thoughts, Brian? Any closing comments?
No, just thanks for having me on. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Thank you for your support. Thanks for supporting people like Scott. I actually do follow Scott on Telegram and all of his updates because I don't really follow the tactical situation closely. I follow it through people like Scott, and he does a good job collecting and summarizing all of this. There's a huge amount of information online, and he does a good job filtering through it and presenting it in a way that is useful for me. So I really appreciate his work, and I enjoyed coming on, and I hope to come on again soon in the future.
You know, the invite is always open, Brian. Thank you, everybody who came in here and watched today. Please like and subscribe. And like I said, go subscribe to Brian's YouTube channel. Have a great rest of your weekend, and do something good for somebody else. Make yourself happy by helping somebody else. Take care. Be safe. And yeah, until next time, guys, goodbye.